Manic and Chill, we are back. We are talking players we wish we had more exposure to going into the season. We are on the eve of the 2023 season, Shane. Talking players we wish we had more of. So let's get right into it. We're going to go through one at each position. And first, before I ask you specifically to name your players, do you ever sit there and say, man, I wish I had more of these specific players? Or is it more of, I wish I had more of like a specific type of archetype or a specific type of build? Because I struggled with this topic. So I know you have players, you're more player-centric than me to a degree, but do you ever sit back and go, I wish I had more of these players, but really what I miss is I wish I had a better roster build or a different type of build?
Nope. It's all about the players. I get envious of people when they're like, I have 115% rostership of player X. And I'm like, well, I only have 20%. So that kind of breaks my heart. I also know that it's my own fault because that's how my brain works. So I'm destined never to probably crest 30% rostership of any player. And when I get to 20%, I start to get a little, I don't want to say nervous, but I start going, all right, I need to diversify these bonds a little bit and let me see what I can do with these players. Can I turn this T. Higgins into a Chris Godwin and something else? Can I turn this Chris Olave into Drake London and someone else? It seems like whenever I get to that 25% share, a rostership is when my brain starts to force me to trade away players. So even though I say, yes, I wish I had more of a specific player, once I have them and I have too many of them, then I start trading them.
I struggled with this. As you can see, I got the process over players shirt on here. It's hard to see the whole thing, but yeah, process over players. So this was a tough one for me. So I did follow the rules, one at each position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. But I think you'll have a much easier time coming up with your list. So let's start quarterback, Shane. A quarterback you wish you had more exposure to going into the 2023 season. Who we got?
Actually, and I'm going to go high end. It's Patrick Mahomes. As much as I love high end quarterbacks, apparently something about me tries to get them on the cheap because I only have one Patrick Mahomes. Now, mind you, and I know this is the opposite of what we're talking about, mind you, I do have a ton of Kyler Murray and Deshaun Watson and Jalen Hurts and stuff like that. But that's because I bought them low. I don't have a lot of Patrick Mahomes. I mean, and I know that feels like an obvious one because he's the quarterback one. But there was a time, remember last year, before last season, people thought Josh Allen was the quarterback one. And there was some noise about how Patrick Mahomes was going to fall down the list a little bit. Maybe he wasn't as good as we thought he was. And then he went out there and was the, I don't know, QB3 or so overall with basically me and you as his wide receivers. And obviously Travis Kelce, that helped. So just take that as a lesson too, though. So if you see some cheap Kyler Murray, you see some cheap Deshaun Watson out there, maybe now's the time to pounce on those so you can build up your portfolio. So when they're talked about in that Lamar Jackson, when they're talked about in that breath, that neighborhood with Patrick Mahomes, maybe you could have some too. Not you specifically, but you, the listeners.
So real quick, why do you have only one? Is it because you've tiered off of Mahomes for lesser QBs, other assets, or were you always pretty low on him? What's the deal with only having one? Because it feels like you've been in a lot of leagues for a while. You should have more than one.
You should. I mean, I've tiered off of them a lot. Other times, I just wasn't lucky enough to get the 101 in the draft, and I wasn't willing to pay up to move up to that section in the startup. And then even in derbies, a lot of times I like to pick, like 104, 105. I like people to make decisions for me because I don't want my pick to be 212 on the way back. And I want to be able to have that second rounder good enough that I can entice someone to let me move back up into the first round with it. That's mostly why.
For me, it's Kenny Pickett. I only have one Kenny Pickett. I know we've had some fun debates about Kenny Pickett versus Mac Jones and do they really matter? So Kenny Pickett's just gotten a lot of buzz the last 3-4 months, had a good preseason. The reason I didn't have a ton of him was just because there was only one quarterback in last year's rookie draft, and with where the current landscape was at QB, I just didn't take him. And there was always somebody else going, well, he's a first-round quarterback, and I'd rather take him over a wide receiver. So I had none. Ended up acquiring 3 in the offseason, but I've already traded away 2, and I only have 1 left. Now, do I think Kenny Pickett has a top 12 ceiling? Maybe I could squint, say he has maybe 1 season, 2 seasons that fits in that range. But I do think he has a much better shot than I gave him credit for to just land in the, hey, he's a solid QB2 range. And I think the thing we undervalued most is that he's with an organization that had a plan when they drafted him and are going to see that plan through with a lot more confidence than we probably have seen from other teams that draft QBs. I mean, was he more talented than Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield or even Zach Wilson or some of these other guys that have come through? Probably not. But he landed in a spot where they had a plan and there's stability. So even if 2 years from now, there's talks of, man, Kenny Pickett hasn't had a season over 500, or both years they've been 9-8, and he's the 18th best QB in the NFL. Is that a guy you really want to pay on the open market? That's a different discussion. But if you're telling me he's going to get there, he's going to get 4 or 5 years worth of starts, then I think I'd be willing to buy in at where his price was and maybe where his price is right now. So I only have one. The problem, Shane, is trying to acquire Kenny Pickett. This isn't a good time to buy him because he's trading for top 15 QB prices, to where you might be able to get a CJ Stroud or a Bryce Young for a Kenny Pickett in a second or something like that. To the where now I'm going, all right, I'm willing to go the other way. But I just wish I had more. So I think the only way I can get him, what do you think? Tearing off of somebody like Dak Prescott or a Tua Tagovailoa, someone like that? You think you could get the Kenny Pickett plus a second, plus an extra starter?
I'm 100% comfortable making that tier down. Look, I liked Kenny Pickett. Like, this is a strong word. I liked him a little bit more than the market last year, I think, mostly because I could get him cheap. And I had him in a number of leagues. So now I only have him in 3 because I've moved him in a few leagues. I definitely wish I had more. But yeah, if I could move from Tua or Dak down to Kenny Pickett, pick up a starter in a second, I'd do that in a heartbeat. And obviously, we're talking about start 10, start 11, not like start 8, start 9 leagues like that, because that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah, I think it's the tier down is how you have to get to Pickett if you want to buy more. Or you just send a random late first, I guess, if you really need a quarterback and it's like that's what you can get them for, then fine. But I think right now, right before the season, is a hard time to make that because a lot of teams have already been set up the way they want, and they're not just going to sell a random QB for what they think could be like a mid to late pick. So plant your flag, but that's one where I wish I had just a couple more shares. I literally only have 1 out of 53 leagues. I wish I was like at 3 or 4. That's where I'm up with Tua, Derek Carr, that type, Jordan Love, Geno Smith. Like if I'm up in the 3-4 range, I can live with being in that range with a bunch of those other guys there. So tight end. So I'll go with tight end. There's a ton of different tight ends that I could probably say that I wish I had more of. It's a tie of where I would go, but I think looking at my exposures right now, I would have to say it's probably Sam Laporta. And it's only because I think if you look at their depth chart, there's a chance that early in the year, he kind of pops as a usable tight end right away. He's already got the draft capital. He's already got a profile to go along with his draft capital. And he's on what I think is going to be an exciting offense for fantasy, meaning people are going to like whatever weapons are there, even if they're bad, like Josh Reynolds or Khalif Raymond. There's going to be players there where you go, huh? But they're actually producing. So I think Laporta can pop early. The danger is if somebody like that pops early, what then happens in the community? People projected that his ceiling is going to be Mark Andrews. And the odds that he goes from a good tight end to an elite one is very low. But I think there will be some tier opportunities to where I could see a world where you are buying a disappointing Kyle Pitts for a Sam Laporta in a second. Like I can see a world where that deal goes down within the first couple weeks of the season, and I don't think they're even comparable from who I would want long-term. So I think Sam Laporta, I only have 5% of Sam Laporta, 3 out of 53 leagues. And again, if I would have just drafted him on the hopes that he pops early, I can make a profit on him because you could have got him in some decent spots. So I'll go Sam Laporta.
So you're looking for guys that you can sell. I like it. Well, in that instance, you're looking for someone that you can sell. Me, it's someone that I should have bought more of. I'm going high end again. It makes me mad that I didn't do it. Kyle Pitts. I don't have enough Kyle Pitts. 2 leagues, that's it. And what's more galling about that is I could have gotten him for a severe discount after last season. And that's when I should have tried to do the buying on him. I tried to do the buying on him in the last 2 months. And that's when people start thinking about, well, the season's going to start and he could be a difference maker. I'm not going to move him when you're going to try to give me a random first. I'm not going to move him when you try to give me Dallas Goedert in 3 seconds. I guess that's also part of my problem is I'm not willing to pay market. So I'm still trying to buy him at below market prices. And I just can't. But mostly the reason I wish I had more than him is it's a failure in my own process of not buying in on a player that could be a difference maker for legitimately no reason. Like there was no reason to think that he's not going to smash, right? Coming off his rookie year, even last year, I know he smashed, but when he played, his target share was still insane. It's still a concentrated offense, even with Bijan Robinson. We expect them to throw more with Desmond Ridder back there. I mean, with Ridder back there last year, they did throw 28 times a game, which is incredibly low, but I'd expect that to pump to the 30, 31, 32 range, and he could still make a lot of noise on that small volume as long as the target share is high. So I'm feeling like I missed out. I missed out on my opportunity to get what could be a Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews type player. And getting players like that at the price that you could have gotten Kyle Pitts 4 or 5 months ago, and missing out on it, probably going to sit with me for a while.
So this is tough for people to stomach, but let me just ask your opinion on this. You have a stacked team, best team in the league. It's 2 PPR. You have Patrick Mahomes. Are you sending Kelsey straight up for Pitts?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is
Kelsey and a first for Pitts and a second.
It's a stacked team.
It's a team you would already consider very good. Now, part of the reason why you may say it's very good is because you have the Travis Kelsey and Patrick Mahomes stack. But I just look at, I don't have a lot of Kelsey, but the 3 I have Kelsey on, I believe are stacked with Mahomes. And I've already kind of just assumed I'm going to ride that out to 0. But then I'm sitting here going like, man, there are circumstances, and you hear it on content all the time. Oh, I'd trade Pitts for Kelsey in a second. And that's just a narrow-minded view of going for the win right now. Because you really want to bet on a 34, 35-year-old player when you could potentially get like the unicorn at a position that's better than a profile that'll ever come into the league again. I mean, it's risky, but don't you feel like this might be the time where you add a second to Kelsey and at least you're in the conversation with the Pitts manager, as long as they are just not absolutely tanking?
Yeah, and most of the people in your league would probably go, I can't believe you gave up a first and Kelsey to get Pitts in a second. And I don't care about that. You know what I'm saying? So it would be looked at as an L, but the thought process behind it being, well, there's a 12-year age discount, and I know Travis Kelsey is a unicorn, and I wrote him off a couple years ago too soon. He is 34 years old, going to be 35. I can't imagine that he can continue to do this for many more years. I just can't imagine that. But even if he does, if Pitts hits what he's supposed to hit, based off his college production, his physical profile, and his rookie year, he should turn into Travis Kelsey.
Something to think about. If you have a lot of Kelsey, make sure those spots are appropriate to where you can live with the value just dropping off a cliff, because I think it's one of those few circumstances where people are so one-track minded on what the position is and where it matters, they are willing to give up the prospect for the producer. At no other position is that possible. So just something to think about. I'll let you start at wide receiver. We'll do a receiver and a running back each. So who is your receiver you wish you had more of?
So I guess I can't say Chris Olave since I have him in 22% of my leagues, but I do kind of want to say Chris Olave. George Pickens. I wish I had a little bit more George Pickens. I have him in 3 leagues, so it's under 10%. Just barely under 10%. And mostly I wish I could get him or had him so that I could trade him in week 3 after he makes 2 incredible catches in week 1 and then another incredible catch in week 2. And no one realizes that he did, he put up 100 yards on 3 targets and that Deontay Johnson out-targeted him 5-1. But still, you'd still be able to sell him high because he's fun to watch. And Twitter blows up when there's fun players to watch, right? I swear to God, that's why people don't like Deontay Johnson, right? Because he's not fun to watch. What does he do? He's just a professional wide receiver. Here's a 10-yard slant. Here's an 8-yard out. Here's a 10-yard dig. George Pickens is making those fun catches, It's 30 yards downfield. He's pushing off the defensive back. The refs missed the call, but that's okay. They didn't call that offensive pass interference, and he makes the call, and it looks beautiful. And people's dicks get hard, and they just want it. And if I had it, I'd be able to give it to them, and I don't have it to give to them.
Yeah, I have actually more Pickens than I thought. I have 10% of Pickens, which is, pretty standard for me to have a receiver in that range. But I agree with what you're saying. And part of my answer leads into exactly what you said with Pickens. And if I would have just listened to Shane, my esteemed co-host for the last 6 months, I wish I had more Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, both. I only have 4% of both, so 2 out of 53 leagues. Now, a couple of them I've traded away in package deals. So it's not that I didn't have any, but I've moved a couple of them. I believe I've moved an Olave and 2 Garrett Wilsons over the summer for tear downs or packages. But I wish I had even more now because I'm pretty confident that one of those 2, maybe you add in 1 or 2 other receivers from last year, one of them takes a huge leap this year even to where even if they're not better than every receiver, they are seen from the community as being the clear alpha or the clear wide receiver 3, 4, whatever it is. Wilson's already there. Olave's pretty close, but wish I had a couple more in my back pocket, not just for the production that they could give, but for the real sexy window they're going to offer once they do hit that mark. And this is the prime time. Like their second year where they're still seen as super young. Everyone's still excited about them. Once you get into year 3, year 4, people start to lose the excitement a little bit unless the player is just absolutely out of this world elite. Think about CeeDee Lamb right now. This is CeeDee Lamb's going to be his 4th year. He's good. People are not more excited about CeeDee Lamb than they are Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson. They're just not, because they're going, man, those are the new guys. CeeDee Lamb kind of is what he is. So if you go back to the tear down episode, there's a reason why I would want Olave and Wilson. It's just because I think they're one of the few assets that you can pretty much go and do whatever you want if they hit. And if I have both of them, I'm pretty sure I have a couple pieces that I know we're going to hit, and they're going to be able to hit on some major tear down options. So I wish I had both of those.
So just real quick, real funny corollary. I have one CeeDee Lamb, and it's not because I don't like him. It's because what did I do before last season? I traded CeeDee Lamb for T. Higgins in first, Amon-Ra St. Brown in a first, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a pretty good chance, that's what you're going to be able to do with Olave and or Wilson after this year.
Well, it's funny because I do practice what I preach. I'm looking right now. So I have 2 Garrett Wilson, 2 Chris Olave, 2 CeeDee Lamb, 3 Jalen Waddle, and 4 Amon-Ra St. Brown, and 3 A.J. Brown. So that tier we talked about on the video, that 3 through 8, I'm under 8% on all of them. And then if you go to other tiers, I'm way more. I'm over 10, over 15%. So I have done a lot of that, tiering off of those players in that range for lesser receivers and picks, or lesser receivers and players. So I think we're both practicing that. It just feels like there's going to be a peak window for the guys like Olave and Wilson because they're so young. I think it's going to be very hard to tier off of Lamb and A.J. Brown. You know what I mean? Like that time has passed. They're not the fresh new toys anymore where everybody has to have them. So I think that's key to have those guys as they're ascending, because it just gives the options in terms of the demand out there. Like a rebuilding team is much more likely going to go, gimme Chris Olave versus gimme A.J. Brown.
Yes.
And that's why the options, I think, are, man, I always want to have a couple players in those tiers if I ever need to sell. So
I, just me, I have a lot of Chris Olave, like 24% of my leagues, I think, something like that. Garrett Wilson, a little bit less. I wish I had more Wilson, but frankly, Chris Olave was cheaper to get in leagues because I guess people didn't look at the stats, or they just don't believe in Chris Olave for whatever reason. But what's going to be fun is at the end of this year, if Chris Olave does what I think he's going to do, he's a top 10 wide receiver in points per game. Am I going to have the process? Am I going to be process minded enough to then tear off of him, or am I going to try to hold on to him and go, I think the upside's even higher?
Yeah, I think you're pretty smart, though. I think you understand that even if he goes out and just absolutely does everything you've said he can do, you ride what you have because you have a lot of Chris Olave, and then it's hustling time, like it's time to flip one of those into Marvin Harrison, or flip one of those into JSN in a first or something. Like that's the move. That's where you go since you have so much of them. Running backs, I'll let you lead running backs, and we'll end the show with that. Our favorite position, with which I think either of us probably are not completely heartbroken that we don't have more of a running back. But what do you got here?
Can I say none? I mean, look, I have 6 shares of Bijan Robinson, which is my most rostered name running back. I've got 5 shares of Jahmyr Gibbs, ton of Rashad White. You know who it is. I touted him all last year when he got drafted. Talked about his draft capital, told everyone, hey, I know they don't throw to the running back, but they just spent a second-round pick on this guy, and he's a hell of a pass catcher. It's his world. James Cook. And then he went out there and he averaged the most yards per touch of any rookie running back last year. I apparently just remembered his first game when he fumbled on his first carry, and Sean McDermott tried to murder him. And hit him, put him in hiding for several weeks, and didn't pay attention. At the end of the year, they actually used the kid a little bit. And then they moved on from Devin Singletary. And then in the preseason, I know Damian Harris was hurt, but Damian Harris is always hurt. It looked like James Cook's opportunity shares are going to be bonkers based off what he did in the preseason. So I wish I had more James Cook. I only have him in 3 leagues. And he's a guy I touted all last year.
Yeah, that's ironic because you were very high on James Cook. You were very much into just buy James Cook and trust the process of the offense and whatever. But, I actually think that I would have said the same answer before I even knew what yours was going to be. But part of it is not for the reason you would think. I don't think you can sell a guy like James Cook, but I think in the right build, somebody like James Cook is great to have because you You just play him. He's attached to the offense. The way he scores points is going to be the way that you think it's favorable for you to have production at running back, but only if it's in your lineup. Especially the way we build teams, he is the perfect running back where you just go, all right, he's my RB2. I'm just going to play him. And if he's good, he's going to produce. He may not produce top 20 numbers, but he's going to give you weeks where he produces. But you have to have access to him. So even I think his floor is very good if you roster construct around him. Man, outside of James Cook, it's tough because there's a lot of other ones. I'm looking at my shares. I mean, I'm low on Travis Etienne. I'm low on Rashad White. I'm low on Kenneth Walker. I'm low on Zach Charbonnet. I'm low on Najee Harris. I'm low on Javonte Williams. Like all of those, I actually don't mind being low. So I think I'd have to say Breece Hall. I think I had 4 Breece Hall last year. I sold 3 of them when he got injured. A couple of them were for deals that I wish I could take back. And I think that's that. I underestimated the bounce back value that Breece Hall could have. Now, it's interesting because Breece Hall's value is bounced back, but I actually think if he doesn't come out and play well this year, the value will go down again, right? Like he needs at some point to show he's healthy and be what he was last year. It can't just all be living on this mythical potential of what he had last year. Oh, he'll get back. He'll be fine. So I do think he's kind of at his peak value, like RB3 in Dynasty. It's going to be tough for him to get higher than that. And I think we both underestimated just how quickly the market would buy back into him when they didn't do the same on Akers or Dobbins or Javonte Williams. So yeah, I think with Breece Hall, the lesson learned is understand who the player was and how good they were and how much people loved them before the injury, and then weigh the injury based on that. Because I think that is the biggest driver of everything. If people weren't fully bought in of him being elite before, then you have questions about the injury. But if it's an elite player that suffers a season-long injury, if they come back, the market's going to be almost right back to where it was. The only reason Breece Hall's market is a little lower is because the running back market as a whole is lower. But I think relative to the landscape, he's just where he was last year, like literally like RB2 range.
You know, I don't have a lot of convicted player takes, but when I do, I should probably try to heed them because, again, Breece Hall was a guy that I was absolutely in love with. I had a lot of Breece Hall. I traded Breece Hall for too light. So sometimes, you know, it's best to, you know what, let me take 24 hours, 48 hours and think this through before I make a move like that I don't have to make today. I don't, you know. Even if there's a game on Thursday, I probably have 3 days to think about this before I even have to worry about filling my roster. So sometimes just slow down, make sure this is the move that you actually want to make.
One good thing about having a portfolio is I always kind of know where I stand generally with how the week feels. You know, I know if some of these players we talked about today smash, and I'm watching Red Zone and I see Breece Hall went for 2 touchdowns and 6 for 90 on the ground and 8 catches or whatever it is. You know, I know I'm probably struggling because I don't have a lot of Breece Hall, and I bet you I'm playing him in 7 leagues, you know, and same with the quarterbacks. And then vice versa, the players that we have a lot of exposure to, maybe we'll do a separate video on that. I know if those guys get hurt and leave the game early, or I see they had a 2-point game, I'm in trouble because I probably had, you know, that. You probably had Chris Olave starting in 9 leagues, and if he has 6 points, you're like, oh, that's not good because that's one of my better assets on my team. So you ride those ups and downs with your portfolio, but that's all I have to say. You got any closeout words?
No, man, this was fun. Maybe we will do too many players that we have too much of. Although, again, I think the way that we play, there's probably not any players that we would go, I have too many of this guy.
Yeah, maybe that'll be a separate video where we talk like some portfolio strategy of once we get to a certain percentage, what's the move, especially if the market isn't exactly what you think it would be. So Manic and Chill out. Happy start of the 2023 season to everybody, and we will see you soon.